Do you remember while playing games as a kid, seeing things that felt so out of place? Enemies you would never expect to see in non-horror games. Enemies that would haunt your dreams. Well, this video is about my personal experience with enemies that left a mark on me. So yes, I finally made something a bit unique for you. A custom iceberg chart. I always get annoyed with the charts I cover to see many repeated entries of the most obvious choices like the mad piano from Mario 64. Even if those entries are completely valid, this chart is quite unique. It will be also quite embarrassing due to my personal experience tied with each entry. So that's why at first glance some entries could be a little lower on the list, but the story behind it made it to be on a deeper layer. I also apologize in advance to you because this list will feature a lot of older games. It's not easy being old. By the way, I also had some rules for the chart because we need to be civil after all. First of all the games could not be a horror game. Second, I tried to put only one character per game. And the third rule is quite simple, this is only about characters, no music, no levels and so on. And I always wanna hear about your scariest enemy encounters in non-horror games. In the last chart, Blue Girl stated she was scared of the enemy Zero. And she wasn't the only one, I think. Tell me about yours in the comments. Now you know how to support the channel, so please do, it does help a lot. So I hope you prepared something to drink and snack, because we can now start the video. But before we start with the first layer, like always, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you will enjoy this video. The Spiv. The first entry is none other than the Spiv from Medieval 2 for the PlayStation 1. I do not consider Medieval as a horror game. It does have a gothic vibe going on, but we can compare Medieval to Silent Hill, Fatal Frame and the rest of the horror crew. Now let's talk about the mysterious character Spiv. I always thought of him as an odd and grim character. He's like on your side, but for a price. Unlike Moneybag in Spyro, who is also a questionable salesman who will try to scam you, looking at Spiv, I was afraid to buy something from him and then get beaten up and robbed by him. But you could buy many goodies from him, like ammunition for your range weapons, but also enchantments for your weapons. Again, it was all for a price. Also, a Spiv is an old term for a petty crook who can turn his hand to anything as long as it doesn't involve hard work.
Wait a minute.
𝘾𝙪𝙨𝙬𝙗. Oh boy, this Digimon caused me a lot of stress. As some of you know, I grew up in the middle of that frantic era where Pokemon/Digimon were producing everything from games, animes, cards and so on. Of course, when I got my little chubby hands on Digimon World 3 for the PlayStation 1, I was the happiest little boy out there, because the PlayStation 1 didn't have any Pokemon game back in the day. But you're completely wrong. I had a Pokemon game on my PlayStation 1 which is called Pokemon Crazy Hit 2. It was a bootleg game that landed in my possession somehow as a kid. I completely forgot about the game until now. It's a hot mess of a game, you don't want to try it out. But back to Digimon World 3. At first glance it's a very cheerful game with a light vibe going on. Just beautiful graphics combined with a great soundtrack. The combat was also solid, but here is the catch, it's notoriously hard. Well, it's actually not that hard, but it's very grindy. You really need to level up your Digimon so much to progress just a bit further. And that's where 𝘾𝙪𝙨𝙬𝙗 comes in, because after you want to leave the first area of the game, and I was always curious what hides between the mountains. Well, it was 𝘾𝙪𝙨𝙬𝙗 who would completely annihilate me. By the way, I was so stubborn, I used to grind so much at the starting area that I could get my revenge on 𝘾𝙪𝙨𝙬𝙗. Taz. What do you mean you were scared of Taz? Which Taz? The Tasmanian devil? Yes and yes. The question is probably why and how. Well, 𝘾𝙬 was a quite weird character. He would eat everything up, and he was quite loud and crazy. But that wasn't a problem to me, as he still looked like a cartoon character, so it was all under control. But this entry is about a character / location. I said / location. I'm still sticking to the rules here. The main point of how 𝘾𝙬 scared me is in the level, which is Halloween theme. The level was fine and dandy, but somehow the whole vibe of the level got to me. Seeing 𝘾𝙬 turn in a shade of purple with blood-soaked eyes, resembling something like a living corpse, made this level stand out. Not too overwhelming, but enough to stand out and to be on the first layer of this chart. 𝘾𝙬𝙚𝙚. I know that 90% don't have any clue about this enemy. And I don't blame you, because Pandemonium 2 wasn't the most popular game of the 90s, but it was a psychedelic insanity. I mean, it's literally on the cover of the game. It's like an acid version of Mario, and instead of playing a fat Italian plumber, you play with a sassy sorceress called Nikki, which I would choose over Mario anytime. A little fun fact, that's why also the game got bad criticism, because they transformed Nikki from this to this, mostly because of Lara Croft and her appeal to older audiences. But the game is a real trip if you're into platformers, and if you haven't tried this game out, do it. The entry is about a quite unique boss you will encounter, which is a bit egg-like. It's quite simple, I don't like him. He would spawn from a huge egg which had some green fluid coming out, his mouth was purple with sharp teeth, and I don't know, he creeps me out a bit. Again, he was much huger than your character, floating around clapping his hands. Still, the first layer is quite harmless compared to the other entries you will see going further. Then Robot. The Nintendo 64 folk were scared of Mad Piano, the endless staircase, and so on. But on the PlayStation 1 I had the same problem with a tin robot which hid in the attic. I mean, Toy Story 2 was such a lovely game, and I adore it. It was one of the first few games I reviewed on this channel. As a kid I watched Toy Story, I played the SNES version of the game, but when I got my hands on the PlayStation 1 version, which was fully 3D in somewhat a open level design, oh boy, it was a real game changer for me, because you could explore big areas filled with all sorts of minigames and things to collect. But nothing prepared me for the robot. I simply wasn't aware that there was a boss fight. After going to the attic, you will see him facing back to you and just waiting. Then suddenly a music change and the guy would dash into you like a lunatic, and your lasers wouldn't work because he would reflect it. Not the most difficult boss fight, but it was quite annoying, because he could easily knock you out the boxes and you need to do it all over again. Beheaded Kamikaze. Serious Sam isn't the most kid-friendly game out there. Hold up, you're saying that Serious Sam isn't a kid's game? Then who the hell installed this game on my PC when I was 8? Well, yes, you heard me right, I was definitely too young to process some of the stuff I saw in the game. As a child, I could quite easily tell that the monsters are bad and I had a chainsaw, so let's go down to business. But the moment I saw the beheaded kamikaze, it all changed for a bit. Well, the monsters were, well, monsters, but the kamikaze were humans. They were a bit relatable. They didn't have a head and they also had bombs in their hands, running and screaming towards you despite having no mouth. I mean, I was 8, it would be a wonder if this didn't scare me. And sometimes one of those fuckers would stuck somewhere and I would hear the screaming like an echo, which made it only worse. So, we're done with the first layer. Now let's see what awaits us in the layer 2. Mokujin. Layer 2 begins with Tekken 3. Yes, a fighting game, in which I spent countless hours in it, perfecting moves, beating the crap out of my friends when I actually made them play the game with me, good memories. But there was one thing that was quite out of place for me. And no, that's not the ogre or devil Jin, but Mokujin. Why, you ask? Well, a quite weird story is that I didn't like Mokujin because he didn't have any special moveset, but it was copying other characters like he was just a doll, like he was possessed by someone or something. The worst part is his lifeless eyes, which are like flame pits. But to top it all off, all of the end cutscenes were animated, and the one from Mokujin was like a live action cutscene, which caused some unease because it gave me a sense of reality that this 5'10", 200-pound woodman would actually live somewhere. You can hate me so much for this entry, but my 5-year-old brain didn't know how to process this data any better. Yep, I was 5 when I beat Tekken 3 on very easy. Rest is history. Giant Ant. This is from one of my favorite PlayStation 1 games, Vigilant 8 Second Offense, which was like 10 times better than Twisted Metal in any regard. It had some awesome levels filled with hidden stuff, a great soundtrack with all types of music, and a good bunch of unique cars to play, and co-op to play with your buddies to top it all off. It's still a game that my best friend and I play every so often. In Vigilant 8 there is a level called Arizona. In the level you could find a big Easter egg. If you decide to destroy the observatory located on the stage, a giant meteoroid will hit the ground. After you decide to destroy it, in it you will find a giant alien ant which shoots laser beams and starts to cause mayhem. You could relatively easily kill the giant ant, but the worst part is, after you kill it, another meteoroid will hit the ground with the next one in it. Persian. Again, the old Snorky talks about some old forgotten games, but Breath of Fire 4 was such a great game that they introduced me to the world of JRPG. It was pretty light and cheerful, with occasional dark moments combined with funny dialogue. Like many RPGs from that time, you could find members who would tag along to help you on your epic quest to save the world. Among them was the weird robot 𝘾𝙪𝙨𝙚𝙗𝙚. 𝘾𝙪𝙨 has a personality that could be described as quite strange, prone to bursts of laughter at inappropriate moments, and speaking in third person, using line like "We should be ready when we reach the capital," says 𝘾𝙪𝙨. I never beat Breath of Fire 4 because maybe I was too young at the time and I spent too much time on fishing. I moved on and never properly sat down to play the game again. That's why 𝘾𝙪𝙨 is on the list. He was a quite weird fella whose attentions were unclear to me as a kid. I'm still waiting to jump back to see the full story of this game and discover the history of 𝘾𝙪𝙨. About which game is this? Lab Assistance is quite an unclear entry. Well, if I say it relates to a certain Bandicoot, yes, this entry is about Crash Bandicoot, more precisely Warped, the third part. Yes, I was freaked out by all sorts of the lab assistants. Shout out to the huge one with 2 heads and the wizard who turns you in a chicken. The thing that freaked me out was the level under the hub level. You would see how Cortex has a whole clone army of lab assistants and also turning them into all the enemies you fought until this point of time. Just the whole idea about cloning was scary because I thought those were just random people who wanted to help Cortex for some reason. But the fact that Cortex is actually creating them was quite weird for me at the time. Trigens. How many of you played the original Far Cry, set in the paradise-like setting of a tropical island made by Crytek, a game that set the bar high for every shooter after that, in a graphical sense. Crytek used their Cry engine, which resulted in some truly humongous outdoor environments, and it still does look very good. The story is just okay. The most important thing is you need to kill mercenaries in the jungle. But the second part of the game turns this game almost into a horror game where you encounter the Trigens. traumatizing are a group of pissed off genetically altered beings created by Krieger and his scientists using a mutagen designed to enhance strength, speed and endurance of primates, including humans. But it all went wrong and they escape. First of all, I didn't expect this at all. And the even worse part is that the difficulty becomes ridiculously hard. I never managed to get far because of those things. They were quite annoying, leaping around, having a huge range to attack you, and they could kill you in a matter of seconds. I just hated them. Because Trojans destroyed one of my favorite games, and because of them I would replay the first levels and wander around to explore the island. Yikes. From paradise to hell, I guess. Fast zombies. City 17 is quite a unique place, which feels very home-like after thinking about how much time I spent in there. Half-Life 2 isn't a horror game, at least I would not consider it, but this layer has two games that are quite in between. Half-Life 2 was an industry-changing title. It delivered everything, from gameplay, story, but also graphics. And of course, tension and anxiety due to the headcrabs in the game. The standard headcrab isn't a fear-inducing enemy, but after a headcrab takes control of a body, it's a small game changer, because they will fight back even in groups. But that one mutation of them scared me a lot as a kid, and that's the so-called fast zombie. The black one. I didn't find any specific name other than that. The problem was with the zombies, well, it is in their name. He was fast, which resulted that you need to act quickly to survive. Often they would break windows trying to get to you. Ravenholm as a whole was a point in the game that young Snorky didn't expect at all, but still Half-Life 2 makes my top 10 list of best game ever, and I made a whole video just about that. Matador. Matador is not the scariest enemy out there, but how he just suddenly starts talking to you and teleports you out of the level to his realm, which looks like hell, with thunderbolts hitting the ground and flames all around, and there he stands, Matador, giving his epic speech how only one will escape this realm alive. Anyone who played Persona and didn't play Nocturne is here for a hard beating, because Nocturne was the first Shin Megami Tensei game I ever played. It was just unforgiving. The Matador was a tough enemy that would challenge you and your party. His design is simple but effective. He's a skeleton dressed like a matador. But the speech, the sudden level change, his appearance were a perfect mix to make this a very intense moment. Deer Hunter. So this entry isn't from a horror game, it could only be considered as a classic FPS game. In Time Splitters 2 there is a mission called Mansion of Madness. In the mansion were all sorts of experiments done. You and your sidekick, which wasn't much of a help, could enter the dining area. You would need to fight some zombies, and then suddenly the deer mounted on the wall comes to life and starts chasing you. Being haunted by a half deer, half human mutant isn't the most pleasant childhood memory to have. It was a tense boss fight, but like always, tell me about your favorite encounters as a kid. Butchers.
Fresh meat.
You probably think Diablo 1 and the infamous Butcher, a scene which did send shivers down my spine, but I would consider Diablo as a partially horror game and RPG, of course, but this would be a quite obvious choice. But this entry isn't about a butcher, but rather butchers, plural. But why is that? Have you ever played a game called Postal 2 Share the Pain? It was a spit in the game industry's face. Postal 2 was a game that I really enjoyed. I mean, this could only describe me as a sadistic maniac. Well, I hope not, because I didn't take anything too serious in the game. But what did caught me off guard was the butchers. They would capture humans and put them into a meat grinder, so they could produce meat to sell to other humans. It was the most sickest thing I saw in a game for quite a while. Of course, the butcher, after seeing you, would attack you and become your enemies, and that's why you're on the list. Besides that, the freaking cow head was also so disturbing, which is actually a weapon that can be found on a thing that looked like a sacrificial altar. Urk 1. Star Control 2 The Urk-1 Masters is a 1992 video game, the sequel to Star Control. It was developed by Toys for Bob, yes, that Toys for Bob, who made the Spyro and Crash Trilogy Remastered editions. Star Control was an epic early 90s PC game. The game possessed such a special charm it is hard to describe. It had quirky characters, a lovable soundtrack and a great atmosphere. I love to play old weird PC games back in the early 2000s because many of them were on a demo disc for free. This is a very interesting game and many people don't talk about it sadly, but I like to every so often remember the days playing this game with my friend who was a bit older. He used to translate me stuff because, of course, English isn't my first language. He told me about the Urk ones, which was divided into two subspecies. One of them was a master race that had a simple goal. They wanted dominance over the galaxy by destroying everything in their way and didn't have any regard for life forces found in space. The second one was a bit more forgiving, but their goal was imprisonment and enslavement. The story is a bit deeper than that. In the game you're tasked with a special ship built by Earthlings, which was basically the last hope to save humanity, and it always frightened me as a kid just to think about that somewhere out in the space there is a superior race that could enslave us. I know that the graphics are quite simple, but I did have a great imagination. You can always tell me how weird of a child I was in the comments, just don't be too harsh, please. The Night Mother. I am 𝘾𝙪𝙨𝙯𝙬𝙗, a speaker of the Dark Brotherhood, and you are a killer, a taker of life, a harvester of souls. Your work, your deathcraft, pleases the Night Mother, and so I come to you with an offering, an opportunity to join a rather unique family. I can't have a rant about my childhood games without at least mentioning Oblivion. In the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, there is a closed society called the Dark Brotherhood, and in there you will meet a unique character called the Unholy Matron, better known as the Night Mother on the list. It is a spiritual leader of the Dark Brotherhood. She receives prayers from people seeking to arrange assassinations, and she would tell those desires to the listener of the Black Hand. I mean, the whole Dark Brotherhood was such a mystery for me, and I was intrigued to dive in. We could essentially call them like a cult. Common folk would pray to a ghost, which would then grant wishes through her followers and assassinate people. The whole concept was wild, and I was also surprised when Lucian waked me up in the middle of the night, because being in the Dark Brotherhood felt so wrong and so dirty at times. I know it's a quite weird entry, but it is what it is. Snork. Yes, the Snork. Not Snorky, but Snork. Who is the Snork? Have you ever played a Slav simulator game which goes under the name Stalker? If you're not familiar with this old PC classic, it's a simple game where you're located in a zone, drinking vodka and having fun with your comrades while being on a hunt for artifacts. Because the whole place is set in Chernobyl, there is some radiation which led to mutations in the wildlife, but also humans. Some of the creatures you will encounter in the dark corridors of empty buildings in the zone are Snorks. Apparently they are a result of broken-minded soldiers left to guard the zone. Snorks are recognizable by the loud ground they consistently produce as they crawl on all fours like animals. They are very recognizable because they are still having their old radiation mask on, appearing like having a trunk. Again, we can debate if Stalker is a horror game or not, but it definitely leads more on the horror side compared to Half-Life, but I simply need to include Snork on the list. Sorry. Grand Falloon. Castlevania Symphony of the Night. It's a game that made a genre, Metroidvania. It is a game that I beat many times and I always like to go back and play it again. There is something special about the game. Is it the atmosphere, the whole story about vampires and gothic inspired castle, or just the marvelous soundtrack? And that's a vinyl I want to hunt down so badly. But besides all of those great things the game has, I found something that wasn't so great. And that's the huge 𝘾𝙪𝙨𝙪𝙤𝙗𝙚𝙗𝙚, or Legion. He's referred to as the one who is many. So let's dive a bit deeper with this entry. The origin of Legion's design comes from a biblical account about a demon, or several demons, who possessed a man. The New Statement outlines an encounter where Jesus healed a man from Gadara, possessed by demons while traveling, in an event that came down to known as the exorcism of the 𝘾𝙪𝙨𝙪𝙤𝙬. demonic. The story has many variations. According to the Gospel of Mark, a man possessed by a demon came from the caves to meet Jesus. Jesus approached and called the demon to come out, and he asked his name, to which the demon replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Thus, for the concept of being composed of many, came the design of the shell composed of large number of human bodies. Well, I was definitely terrified by this creature and the whole place, which was filled with skulls. He was just that huge thing composed of human naked bodies that would fall off after you attack it, which would also reveal some tentacles after some parts of them were destroyed, with a eye-like thing that shoots lasers. I mean, the whole backstory about this entry and his design is literally out of hell. Even if Symphony of the Night did have many weird and somewhat disturbing enemies, this wears a crown on my list. Ghosts. Well, ghosts are tied to death. That is simple yet effective game mechanic. Games use death as a punishment to failure, or if you lose head and you're the edge of dying, results in a psychological scare tactic. It makes the game even harder and puts you in a state of fear because of the weakness of your character. But we are talking about the Pokemon game here. Yes, the goddamn ghost in the Lavender Town. In the first generation of Pokemon, Red, Blue and of course Yellow, Lavender Town and the Pokemon Black created a lot of creepypastas and conspiracies, which we all covered on this channel. But looking at the OG games, Lavender Town had that infamous music, and somehow just having a graveyard in a Pokemon game was creepy enough. Like, okay, I know that Pokemons have to die, but do you really need to push that in a kid's face? Pokemon Ghost was one of the things that got to me. Like, do all Pokemons go to the Lavender Town after they die and are transformed into ghosts? Is it possible that Pokemon could, after fading too much time or getting poisoned? Too many questions, I didn't have any answer to it. Hyena Soldiers. Much like Trigens, which we covered on the second layer, this entry is somewhat similar. These so-called hyena soldiers are from the game I quite loved to play as a kid, called Vivisector. It's like Far Cry but worse in every sense. But it's one of those games that is so bad it's actually good, and quite funny. Apparently the game is supposed to be a new Duke Nukem game, called Duke Nukem Endangered Species Hunter. In the beginning, the game lets you fight various animals, and it's a slaughter to be seen. But after playing for a while, the evil doctor who rules the island you're on played God for a bit and started to making human-animal-like hybrids. One of them were the hyena soldiers, and I was so grossed out by them. How they look like, their behavior, walking and running animation would generally creep me out, but the other mutated and genetically engineered animals are also quite weird and unsettling. The whole game actually is. I mean, the doctor's skin is green, for heaven's sake. Try the game to have a laugh, but if you're like 12 like I was, it isn't a game I would recommend. Vampires. This is an odd entry, definitely. You see, while playing Oblivion, I would usually walk around and enjoy the landscape, discovering dungeons and admiring the great graphics, which were fabulous for the time. The one thing I didn't expect, that one time I was on a quest, it would lead me to a cave filled with vampires. I managed to kill all of them to solve the quest, but suddenly I was infected with a disease, which is known as vampirism. So suddenly, with every hour passed, I will undergo a transformation, leading to having some advantages like resistance to diseases and paralyze, but also weaknesses to fire. Not only fire, but also the sun. So suddenly I became like a night crawler. I needed to attack and feed on people, avoid the sun, which resulted in the end of my walks in the province of Cyrodiil. I immediately wanted to find a cure and jumped on a quest to cure myself. That was the time I started to hate the guts of vampires in Oblivion. That simple fact that I could go only out at nighttime annoyed me so much. So I immediately jumped on game facts to find a cure, to get rid of this problem. But before we start layer 6, I do want to thank you for your time and for clicking on this video. If you find this video entertaining or interesting, even if it's a bit different, I hope you will smash that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps a lot. And if you want to take an extra step, you can always join my membership program on YouTube or Patreon to keep me extra motivated to keep producing more videos like this. Yeah, thanks and enjoy the layer 6. Jack of Blades. The gods and demons you fear and worship are nothing to me. Jack of Blades was a quite unique and memorable character in my childhood. I beat Fable like 12 times, I think. I simply loved everything about it. And then I discovered Oblivion, which was a bit more serious RPG game. But the fact that I made a whole video about a Jack of Blades says something. And it's a very in-depth video about his origin and everything about him. What's important for this video is how Jack of Blades made me feel while playing Fable. From the first time I saw him in the arena, it was obvious that something was off. He had a special aura around him. He told you about your mother. The whole story started to get more twisted and more horrific. Discovering more insight of the raid of your village, of how your sister but also mother are alive, and how in every aspect of that Jack of Blades was involved. It really made me hate him. And if you didn't know, Fable had an aging mechanic, and at one point in the game you're trying to rescue your mother from Jack of Blades, but he managed to capture you and lock you up. It is something that I didn't expect. And I was very young while playing this game, of course. I mean, the whole Fable game was quite light and cheerful compared to something like Oblivion, which I played a bit later. It did change how I looked at the game as a whole. The hero, the one who should rescue all of Albion from evil, was locked up. Your hero is getting older, wrinkles starting to show, beard and hair growing because there wasn't any place to take care of yourself, scars all over your body from all the beating. But not only that, you were also humiliated and forced to partake naked in races just to amuse the guards. And all of that because of Jack of Blades, a game character that made me feel and experience hate, which is a thing you need to overcome. Truly, Fable is quite an old game, but a good game, and Jack of Blades was just on point. Fargus. I already talked about Pandemonium 2, and I know I broke my rules again with this entry. I needed to include Fargus, because he's a weird dude. There isn't much to talk about here, because the game doesn't have any deep lore. But what's important is the few times Fargus gets the spotlight, he uses it. First to say, I'm not afraid of clowns, but Fargus made me very uncomfortable as a kid. In some levels, for whatever reason, they put his head into the background, and sometimes you will go straight into his mouth. I'm not sure if this clown in the background is Fargus, but he does look like him. One odd thing is when he gets his special ability, where he's set on fire. I'm not quite sure, but it sounds like he's enjoying it. But the intro was the cherry on top. Seeing him throwing the stick to an enemy, blowing them up and then licking the blood and guts from the enemies was a bit too much for a 10-year-old. And it was obvious I was grossed out. Looking at him now, I simply think he has severe mental problems. But we also have this part of the intro.
Must touch the deep fire. Must touch.
Nope. Next entry. Lawrence Fairfax. Who knows this character? Well, to be honest, I didn't know his name either. I know this sounds a bit strange because I don't know the name of the enemy which disturbed me the most. But it's true. I totally forgot about his name, but I know in which game he is and I know about his evil deeds. You can always try to guess from which game he is down below. So, you ready? It's from SWAT 4 for the PC, released by Sierra in 2005. It's a tactical shooter that holds very well even today. So I got the game from a friend when the game was relatively new. But before we start to dive into the story of Lawrence, I need to tell you a short backstory. At that time I started to watch horror movies, and somehow it happened that like few months ago, before I got SWAT 4, I watched Silence of the Lambs, which is about a top student at a FBI training academy. The young student called Clarence was sent to interview Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a brilliant psychiatrist who is also a violent psychopath, serving life behind bars for various acts of murder and cannibalism. The movie features a scene where a guy had a girl in a house in a freaking man-made hole or a pit or whatever it is, which really left an impact on me because the man took all her dignity and she was like a caged animal down there, which really horrified me because the house from the outside looked just normal. And this connects to the story of SWAT 4. So after some time I got SWAT 4 and played the second mission. I prepared my guys to be well equipped to enter the Lawrence residence. Lawrence Fairfax is the #1 suspect in a string of grisly homicides. Over the last year and a half, 7 women, all of them studying at the state university, disappeared. Their remains show signs of torture and dismemberment. After hearing the briefing of the backstory and the house, it was an instant throwback to Silence of the Lambs. I felt like I was thrown into the movie. I sneak around, quietly look through the windows, spotting his mother who didn't have any clue of what is happening. And then I started to going in. The upper floor was quite normal, but the basement is where all the horrific stuff happened. It was dirty, messy. You and your team were on a desperate rescue mission and just waiting that the big Lawrence would somewhere just jump you and attack you. Seeing the bed he made for the victims on the floor, the room was full of tools, cameras, photos of the victims, but in the basement there was even another self-made basement compartment where you can catch Lawrence in the act trying to abuse another poor girl who was dirty, covered in junk and cockroaches. It was just like, fuck, this is sick. The game isn't a horror game. Was one of the scariest missions I played in a game that isn't a horror game. The mission had also very eerie music in the background which really set the atmosphere just right. It's a mission that did surprise me, especially because everything in the mission reminded me of Silence of the Lambs. After a while, this mission even became my favorite mission of the game. And this is my story of the traumatizing enemies I found in non-horror games. Which enemy or level left you speechless? Where you were really scared or disturbed? I'm really curious. And please tell me in the comment sections, does any of these entries relates to you? If you find this video interesting, leave a like or subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this. It really helps a lot. I thank you so much for sticking to this part of the video, and until the next one, bye.